So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Mountain Talk on the global effects of recycling contamination with Seth Goodman, the CEO of Northstar Recycling. My name is Catherine Target Gross, and I am the Sustainability Officer here at Lehigh, and I'm also part of the Lehigh Alumni Sustainability Alliance leadership team. I'm really excited that we will be hearing from Seth Goodman today. I know this is an issue that is a challenge at Lehigh, as well as other colleges and universities and municipalities. And so I'm eager to hear his insights. Over the next hour, Seth will give a presentation, over the next 30 minutes, Seth will give a presentation on what is going on globally with recycling, with a particular focus on residential recycling. So we'll then have some time at the end for some Q&A. Just a couple of housekeeping items. When we open it up for Q&A, which will be after Seth's presentation, if you sort of put your cursor over the webcast, there's a little chat feature. So we ask that you type in your questions into the chat box. And I'll provide a reminder of that after Seth's presentation. I'd now like to introduce Eric Weiss, the Events Committee Co-Chair for the Lehigh Alumni Sustainability Alliance. Eric graduated from Lehigh in 2014 with a degree in Integrated Engineering and Arts and Sciences. He now works in the materials management consulting industry, where he assists public and private clients to achieve their business goals in a cost-effective, socially conscious, and environmentally responsible way. So thank you, Eric, for organizing this Mountain Talk, and thank you, Seth, for joining us to share your knowledge and expertise on the topic of recycling. Eric, I'll kick it over to you.
Sure thing. Yeah, glad to be here. And so like Catherine said, I'm in the materials management consulting industry. Typically, my clients are public sector authorities, cities, counties, and the like that need help with solid waste and recycling. My role here with Burns & McDonnell is as an economic analyst to be able to support those projects. I joined the LASA, or the Affinity Group, Lehigh Alumni Sustainability Alliance, after I graduated, just to be able to help the university get in touch with what are the alumni in the sustainability industry, and to be able to understand what kind of sustainability initiatives are going on campus after I graduated. So my role as the co-chair for the events committee is where we develop and put on these types of events, either virtual or in-person events in a number of cities around the country. So with that, I'd like to introduce Seth for his part of this talk, and he has a couple slides to walk through with everybody here.
All right. Well, thank you, Eric and Catherine, for inviting me to do a talk today. We're going to talk about the global effects of recycling contamination. I graduated Lehigh in 1992. Feels like a long time ago, because it is. And I am co-owner of Northstar Recycling. I own this company with my brother Noah, and we're based right outside of Springfield, Massachusetts, in East Longmeadow. So just a quick overview of our company and what we do. We are a national recycling company. We do not own or operate any recycling facilities or trucks. We work with large national manufacturing and distribution companies, and we help them with their sustainability goals as they relate to waste and recycling. So we have a big focus on food and beverage companies. And what we've been able to help them do is achieve two things. We've been able to help them reduce what they're sending to the landfill and increase what they're either reusing or recycling. And this accomplishes two goals. We're helping them with their environmental goals, but we're also helping them reduce the amount of spend that they have on all of the waste and recycling that they do. So that's in a nutshell what we do. But today I did want to talk about what's going on with the recycling contamination in the world, and what we see as the future of the recycling industry, given the constraints that we're currently facing. So I want to just go back to the 80s, 1980s. At that time, China, their economy started picking up steam, and they started to grow very quickly. And as such, the demand for recyclable commodities that they had started to increase tremendously because they needed raw materials in order to make the products that they were going to then ship all over the world. So as their infrastructure developed, they started buying raw materials from all over the world with a big focus on buying from the United States. And they bought a lot of plastic, they bought a lot of paper, and they bought a lot of metals. And it was, they had an insatiable appetite for raw materials up until the mid 2010s. And what that did for our infrastructure here in the US is that we as a country and in different areas of the country started developing the single stream recycling programs all over the nation. Because China was not concerned about the quality of the material that was coming into their country at that time. They just needed the volume, and they figured out a way to separate the materials once they landed in their country. So what happened? In the early 2017, we started hearing rumblings that China was going to start putting into effect restrictions on what they were going to allow into their country. And the policy officially went into effect in early 2018, and they call it the National Sword Policy. But we knew it was coming. And essentially what China decided to do was start limiting the amount of materials that were being sent into their country. The materials have, over time, became more and more contaminated. If you can picture what you put into your single stream recycling bin, those materials were sorted and separated at a recycling facility domestically, and then baled, loaded into containers and shipped overseas. A lot of this material, or most of this material, was very dirty. Because China for a long period of time was very lenient with their ability to accept contamination, we as an industry took advantage of that. And material was contaminated, it went to China, nobody ever heard anything about it. Prices were, companies and municipalities were paid pretty good money for their materials. Everything went great. Because China is such a large consumer of raw material, when they put the brakes on what they were taking into their country, that had an immediate effect on the price of raw materials. Not only did it have an impact on the price, but it also had an impact of what was allowed to be shipped to them. So you can see right with the chart, I use cardboard as just one commodity which is representative of all commodities. In 2017, cardboard was trading anywhere between $100 and $180 per ton. And once the National Sword Policy went into effect, the price has consistently gone down to where we're now trading cardboard $30, $40 a ton at the most. It's a little lower than that. Like I talked about, the recycling standards back in the 80s, 90s, 2000s, 2010s, there were no standards. If it was plastic, if it was paper, if it was metal, there was a home for it. However, it was not sustainable because what ended up in China and in other countries around the world was material that did contain some materials that were recyclable, but a lot of materials that weren't. And so China, in addition to other countries, said enough was enough, and we're not going to take in the world's trash. So the new standard is that China is still buying recyclables, but they are buying it in very, very limited amounts. And the quality of what they are purchasing has to be pristine. So what that has caused throughout North America and around the world is that there is a huge glut of recyclables with nowhere to go. So it takes a long time to retrain, and I'll talk about maybe the manufacturing sector first. It takes, up until the national order went into effect, our clients were able to recycle a lot of different materials. They were able to mix a lot of materials together, and they were getting paid for those materials. Once the policy went into effect, these materials either became non-recyclable or they had to be separated and sorted in a way so that they could be recyclable. So in addition, they were being paid for materials in the past, now they're being charged for them. So on the manufacturing side, one obstacle we faced is that companies, they really want to do the right thing and they want to be sustainable and they want to go zero waste to landfill, but they want to do it where it's not going to raise their costs. And the market lately has increased the cost of recycling programs in the manufacturing sector. So we're retraining and re-educating manufacturing clients on how to properly segregate and sort the material so that they can at least recycle it and get the maximum value out of those products. Residential effects, there are increased costs of the residential programs. There are contracts that the waste haulers and the recycling facilities have negotiated with municipalities in the past that are either currently being renegotiated or they will be renegotiated in the future once those contracts expire, because the cost to process the recyclables is a lot higher now because of the quality of material that needs to be produced in order for it to be recycled. And the price of those commodities has gone down drastically since a couple of years ago. We're also seeing that some curbside programs are being eliminated. And we're seeing recycling centers close their doors as well. And other things that are going on, a lot of times you think your material, when you bring it to the curb, is being recycled. There are a lot of communities where the trash hauler is picking up your recyclables, but not going to a recycling center. They're going straight to the landfill. So that's what the current environment looks like. So where do we go from here? Very optimistic about the future of sustainability and the future of recycling for a couple of reasons. The environment that we were operating under for many decades was really not sustainable because in essence, we were shipping garbage to different countries and it was all going away, but we were still shipping garbage. Now we are being forced to innovate and to think about how can we create an infrastructure that truly is sustainable, that makes sense for the long term. It's going to take a while, but some of the things that we're excited about, that we're seeing, that are in the pipeline, is packaging redesign. Again, a lot of the companies that we work with are in the food and beverage space. They are making sincere, dedicated efforts in putting a lot of resources into figuring out how to make packaging that is sustainable at its end of life. How can they create packaging that is recyclable or compostable? And there's a lot of movement across all industries down this path. We're seeing new technologies and new processes being developed. A pretty cool one is the growth of pyrolysis, where plastics that have been deemed non-recyclable, certain plastics can go through a pyrolysis process where the plastics are turned into oil, into biofuel. And we're seeing a lot of growth in that sector of the industry. We're also seeing a lot of dormant paper mills and a lot of plastic facilities being reopened in order to process the glut of paper and plastic that is in the marketplace. They're upgrading the systems. They're making more advanced cleaning equipment so that we can send less desirable paper and plastic to these paper mills and plastics processing centers, and they're developing the techniques and the technology in order to process the dirtier paper and plastics. At the actual recycling facility, there are a lot of robotics developments to better and more efficiently sort and separate the single stream plastics and paper when it comes into the recycling facility. And finally, there's a lot of closed loop projects going on the manufacturing side. A lot of our clients have engaged us to work with their research and development departments, their quality departments, to figure out how they can send the packaging that they're producing at their manufacturing facilities to a paper or plastic processor, and then may have their products be remade using the material that they have scrapped from their manufacturing sites. So a lot of stuff's happening. It's not going to be a quick process. There's going to be a big re-education. I believe that we have to move away from a single stream program where they've been set up and move more towards a dual stream program in order for recycling programs to become viable again. But there's a tremendous commitment in the younger generations and in our country to make sure that we're doing the best that we can for the environment. So with that, thank you for your time, and I'm wide open for any questions that you guys might have for me.
Great, thank you, Seth, and I appreciate your optimistic view on the future. That makes me feel a lot better, given the current challenges that we're facing. So we now have about 12 minutes for questions. So just a reminder, if you have a question, there's a chat box in the bottom towards the middle of the screen. Type your questions into those chat boxes, and we'll get to as many of them as we can. So we do have a question that has come in from the chat box, and I'm hoping that more come in as we go. So Seth, is it safe to presume that the reason why a certain number of plastics are not recycled by some municipalities is that it's because they do not have viable economic value, and they just go into the landfill as a result? And if so, how can we as citizens help to influence them to consider recycling all number plastics?
Yeah, it's there's some plastics that are more desirable than others. PET and HDPE and polypropylene are pretty widely recycled items as long as they're separated and sorted and they're relatively clean. Certain items like polystyrene and other resins are just not as valuable, and it's difficult to be able to recycle all of them in a clean and easy way. So, all these items are recyclable, but the recycling centers only have the ability to sort and separate so well. And so they're looking for the PET bottles, the HDPE containers, some polypropylene packaging, and the rest is really considered an outthrow at this stage and is ending up in the landfill or a waste to energy facility.
Great, thank you. So we've had a couple questions come in around the source separating, and you had spoken about you felt like the next step was going to a two-bin system. And so can you clarify, is that paper and cardboard together and then glass, plastic, and metal together? So that's kind of part one. Can you clarify that? And then part two is, how receptive are municipalities to returning to source separation?
Yeah, great questions. So, I think dual stream is really the minimum that we need to do. And by dual stream, I do mean paper and cardboard in one bin and then plastics and glass in another bin. But even that does pose a lot of challenges. The more we can separate at the source, the easier it's going to be to recycle, but we also have to be practical about this, in that, the more we ask residents to source separate, the less likely they are to do it and do it well. So, certainly single stream was ambitious and really not sustainable in the long term. Dual stream, I believe, will get the most long-term highest recycling rates. But ideally, we want to separate even further, in municipalities where it's possible. And Catherine, what was the second part of that question?
How receptive are municipalities to returning to source separation?
It's really not. I think they're being forced to be receptive to it. Otherwise, the cost of these programs is going to be potentially prohibitive to actually making it work. However, there is a lot of legislation that's being introduced across the country to put the onus of the increased cost of these recycling programs on the actual producers of the waste. So a lot of the food and beverage companies are being targeted, saying, hey, you're making this unrecyclable package. You should be paying for the increased cost of the recycling program. So there's a lot, there's going to be a lot that's going to come down the pipe with that sort of legislation, and I'm interested to see where it goes. But there's no question that the costs of recycling programs are going to increase, and if people in towns want to encourage their residents to recycle as much as possible, I think they have to make the transition to a dual stream system or more.
Yeah. And if I can just jump in here, I think that's a really great look at it, Seth. But just to kind of add to that perspective, a lot of municipalities are constrained by their existing long-term contracts. So if there's something that, you want to do, just kind of the general universal you in your town, I'd say look to the long-term contract that your town may be looking to renegotiate. It may be that the town has already signed into a contract and there's a certain amount of time that they have to be in that contract. But as contracts are renegotiated, having the residents let the town decision makers understand that they want a dual stream system and that would be best is something that can be done.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. Seth, could you talk a little bit more about the different types of plastics and the markets that there are for the different types? Because we're hearing from some folks in the chat box that, their towns don't accept plastics 3, 4, and 5. And I know it varies by municipality. So can you talk about those types of plastics and what the markets are?
Yeah, so the 1s and 2s are the PET bottles and the HDPE. And that's really, like I said, what the municipalities want. The 3s, 4s, 5s are just have very limited markets, and so that's why the towns don't want them. The cost to separate the different plastics far exceeds the revenue that they receive for the plastics in the given environment. So in order to make this work economically, they're deciding not to accept those types of plastics. It doesn't mean they're not recyclable, they are, but the cost outweighs the benefit of putting in the systems to actually separate the materials.
So I guess a follow-up to that is someone had the question of municipalities used to make money on recycling. Do you see that in the future as being possible once again?
It's possible, and this is it's a fluid market, and it's all based on supply and demand. So I can't predict the future of what's going to happen, but at some point there's going to be a really strong demand for plastics. There's a lot of variables. If oil spikes and goes through the roof, there's companies are going to be looking for substitutes to virgin resin. Same thing with natural gas. If other companies or other countries decide to get into the market for recyclable materials, they will absorb the supply that's out there, and the dynamics can shift. We never know. Are the prices that we buy and sell products for, they shift on a monthly basis or even sooner, and there's a lot of variables. So at some point, yes, it'll shift again, but because there's so much material in the marketplace with nowhere for it to go, prices are going to stay depressed for a while, making these municipal recycling contracts be very costly for the towns that they're supporting.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So Europe seems to be ahead of the US in terms of innovation and incentives. They have less landfills, so their tipping fees are higher, and the economics is better for innovation. Is there a learning there that we can take advantage of?
Can you repeat that again, please?
So Europe seems to be ahead of the US in terms of innovation and incentives. For example, they have less landfill, so their tipping fees are higher and the economics is better for innovation. Is there something that we can learn from that model and take advantage of here in the United States?
Yes, they did. Europe does a phenomenal job with their programs, and they've built their infrastructure over time and have educated their citizens over time to do recycling better than we've done it here. In addition, they do have fewer landfills, and there's a lot of energy from waste facilities that are prevalent throughout Europe. So yes, there's a lot of lessons we can learn, but it's going to just take a while because we have to re-educate a society that is so used to just throwing their recyclables into one bin. And it takes a while, but there's lots of lessons to be learned from Europe. It just won't be immediate at all.
Yeah, if I could jump in here about the comment on Europe, they're in a different environment just geographically than we are in the U.S. I mean, the U.S. has lots of space, lots of potential places to build, construct, and operate landfills, and Europe just frankly doesn't. They're very space constrained, and in that environment, it becomes more of a necessity to process the material in a more environmentally beneficial way. And they've created the policy and legislation to be able to carry that out. And as far as what I can tell in the U.S., the Pacific Northwest and the Northeast regions are most similar to Europe, just in terms of being space constrained for building landfills. So just wanted to provide that context.
Great, thank you. So someone's asking if there's a public website to see the market value of recyclable products.
Yes, there are. There's metals websites, there's plastics websites, and there's paper websites. Some of them you have to pay for, but I believe there's information out there for everyone to see, and I can certainly share some of those websites with you guys if you're able to distribute it out to the group. I can certainly.
Yeah, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, no problem.
That would be fantastic. So we are just about at time, but as long as it's okay with Seth, we'll take a few more questions. Is that okay, Seth?
Sure.
Okay. So there's been a couple questions about recycling of plastic bags. Can you comment on that?
Sure. So plastic bags, it's good material. Plastic bags are typically made out of polyethylene, and polyethylene is a really good resin to recycle. The problem with plastic bags, though, is that they're light, and when they really do a great job of polluting the environment. And so that's one issue with the recycling of plastic bags, is that they do end up going to landfills, and then they blow all over the place and end up in oceans and other places where they shouldn't end up. The other issue is when they end up at a recycling facility, because it's soft plastic, that the recycling balers and shredders, that type of product just gets tangled and tied up into machinery, and there is not a good way to actually get it into a form where it can then be resold into an end use. So those two reasons are why it's difficult to recycle plastic bags. But in and of themselves, it's really good material.
Great, thank you, Seth. So there's been a couple questions about the market and will the market readjust to higher purities and higher recycling rates by itself, or is regulation or incentives necessary to achieve this?
I think it's probably both. I think the market, always adjusts. This is going to take a while because of the unsustainability of what we experienced over the past decades. Regulations will, I think will help. It will help speed it up. But at the end of the day, we have to produce material. We have to produce product that is genuinely recyclable. And if we can't do that, and if we're going to continue to produce packaging and other materials that just don't have a beneficial end of life use, then there's going to be more and more material that's going to end up in landfills and waste energy facilities.
So I think we'll take one more question. And I think this question kind of wraps things up well. Are there signs of companies in the US that are demanding recyclable materials to produce products out of recycled materials?
Yeah, more and more. We're seeing lots of partnerships between companies producing waste and companies that are going to use that waste to make a new product. And we're seeing a lot of demand for recycled content plastics, recycled content paper, and we think that's going to increase.
Could you give an example or two of companies that are doing that?
Yeah, absolutely. So there is a company in Texas that has formed a partnership with Dow Chemical, where they are going to take in all different sorts of plastics waste and make a plastic post-consumer recycled pellet for Dow Chemical. And Dow is going to use that in all the different types of plastic products that they produce. And that was a recent development that is really exciting because it's going to take a lot of the post-consumer plastics and create a recyclable pellet.
Great. Thank you, Seth. Really appreciate you taking the time today to share your insights about the recycling industry. We realized that we weren't able to get to everyone's questions. So we will, if it's okay with Seth, we will circulate the questions that we weren't able to get to and provide responses after this Mountain Talk. So thank you again, Seth. Thank you, Eric, for organizing this event, and hope everyone learned something and is feeling at least a little bit more optimistic about the future of the recycling industry. So thank you, everyone.